Good morning again, everybody. Good morning. 3 weeks ago, we looked at the subject of what happens a second after we die. And if you want to know, I've got all the information on that in a chart form. And then last week, we looked at where are the dead. That was last week. Now today, thank you, Noel. I'd like us to look at some passages that deal with the judgment day, when Jesus comes back and the judgment day. So I'm going to ask you straight away, please turn to the book of Hebrews, chapter 9. Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 27. And it says in Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 27 that and inasmuch as it is appointed unto people once to die, and after this comes the judgment. So we all have to die, and then there's going to be a judgment. Now, this judgment is something that the writers speak a lot about. Please look in the book of John, chapter 5, and it's the last two verses there. John chapter 5, and I'm going to read from verse 28 and 29. Not the last two verses, but John chapter 5, verse 28 and 29. Marvel not at this, for the hour is coming in which all that are in the tombs shall hear his voice and shall come out. They that have done good unto the resurrection of life, and they that have done evil unto the resurrection of judgment. So there's going to be a judgment. There is going to be a judgment. Now, please turn to the book of Acts, chapter 24, and Paul, in his speech here, refers to this coming day in chapter 24, verse 15, verse 21, and verse 25. So, again, Acts 24, verse 15. I'm going to read just those verses. I'll let you read the whole speech of Paul. Verse 15. He said, having hope towards God, which these also themselves look for, that there shall be a resurrection. Notice the word resurrection, both of the just and the unjust. The just and the unjust. Now skip down to verse 21, please. Except it be for this one voice that I have cried, standing among them, touching the resurrection of the dead, I am called in question before you this day. And now skip down to verse 25, please. And as ye reason of righteousness and self-control and the judgment to come, Felix was scared, he was terrified, and answered, go your way for this time, and when I have a convenient season, I will call you unto me. Paul is preaching to Felix here. Felix was a very important politician. And Felix gets scared and he trembles. He said, Paul, go away, when he talks about the resurrection. I'll call you back again some other time. People don't want to hear about the resurrection, right? Now, come with me to the first book of 1 Corinthians, chapter 15. I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but this whole chapter is talking about how Jesus rose, and so we will rise. So 1 Corinthians chapter 15, and I'm going to pick some verses. Verse 35. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 35. Paul says, but someone will say, how are the dead raised, and with what manner of body do they come? And now skip down to verse 58. He says, wherefore, my beloved brethren, Be not steadfast, be you steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as we know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. So this whole chapter is talking about Jesus' second coming, right? Now, as Noel just read, in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and verse 13 to chapter 5 verse 1 to 11, what's going to happen when Jesus comes back? What's going to happen? Let's say he comes right now. What does Paul say in Thessalonians? What's going to happen first? He said that all the dead people in Christ, all the dead will rise first. Then what about people like Malcolm and me and Noeline and all of us? He says, after the dead rise, we will be changed. Because they're going to put on a different body. So that's the order. The dead rise first, then the living will be changed. And then what happens in that chapter? We're all going to meet him in the air. Meet him up in the air. We're going to meet Jesus. And he could come anytime. Skip down to Matthew 25 now. Matthew 25. And this is the judgment. This is a very nice picture that Jesus paints of the judgment in Matthew 25. He's talking about sheep. He's talking about goats. Now, he's not talking about real sheep and real goats. Right? He's saying that the sheep are the good people and the goats are the bad people. So where are the goats? On the left. And where are the sheep? On the right side. So what are the questions he's going to ask him? Ask you and me at the judgment. Try and picture this. Jesus has come. We are all risen. We got different bodies. Not this body. Different body. You don't have to use makeup anymore. You don't have to worry about wrinkles. You don't have to worry about having a shower. You don't worry about getting old or getting hungry or getting tired. It's a different body, he says. So we're going to meet him up in the air. There's going to be a judgment. And look what the judgment is going to be like. Matthew 25. Noel, thanks for reading that. Look what Jesus says. He says in verse 35, and he's saying the same thing to the good and the bad. He says, I was hungry. I was hungry. And you gave me to eat. I was thirsty. He's talking about the homeless people here. The homeless people. Did you walk by them? I was a stranger and you took me in. I was naked. You clothed me. I was sick. I was in hospital. And you visited me. I was in prison. He's not going to ask us, he's going to ask us, have you followed his pattern? But he's also going to ask us, did you help the homeless? Did you visit the sick? Did you visit those in prison? Did you help those in need? That's what he's going to ask us. Now skip down to the book of Revelation. I want us all, please, the last book in the Bible, the book of Revelation. And I'm going to stop with this, but this is so important what the writer of Revelation is saying here. Chapter 20. Chapter 20. Revelation chapter 20. We all got it? And verse 11. This is a picture of what's going to happen in the future. Still future. You got it? Okay. He says, and I saw, Revelation 20 verse 11. And I saw a great white throne, and him that sat upon it, from whose face the earth and the heavens fled away, and there was found no place for them. So no heaven, no earth anymore. And I saw the dead, the great and the small, standing before the throne, and books were open. And you can be 100% sure this is one book. Books were open. Notice it says books were open. And another book was open. Now, here's the question you got to ask ourselves. Which is the book of life? Now, is your name in that book? All right, let's go on. According to the, and the dead were judged out of the things which were written in the books according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead that were in it, and death and Hades. Remember we studied about Hades? Death and Hades gave up the dead. And death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death, even the lake of fire. And if your name was not found written in the book of life, he was cast into the lake of fire. Now this is pretty serious stuff. This is still future. It's going to happen. Whether I like it or whether I don't like it, it doesn't matter. It's going to happen. We're all going to stand one day before the throne. Right, Noel? Mm-hmm. And God is going to judge us. He's going to open his books. Real books. Does he need a real book? No. He knows everything about you. He knows, and he's going to look in the book, especially in the book where for your name. Is your name written in his book? And he's going to judge us by what's written in this book. John tells us that in John 12:48, he's going to judge us by the words of Jesus, right? Now, look at verse 15. This is so important. Verse 15, and if any was not found written in the book of life, he was cast into the lake of fire. Now, come down to chapter 21. Come down to chapter 21. Chapter 21, verse 8. Here's a list of people who are going to be cast. But for the fearful, and the unbelieving, and the abominable, and murderers, and fornicators, and sorcerers, and idolaters, and all liars, their part shall be in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. So that's going to happen after the judgment. I'm going to close with this thought. This is not meant to scare us, but this is meant to make us want to be with him one day. I want to leave this thought, two ideas with you, please. Number one, all of us are going to be there. Number one, we're all going to be there at the judgment. Number two, we're going to be judged individually. So I cannot tell God, this is Annaline's fault. That's why I did this. Right? Mary can't blame Malcolm, or Malcolm can't blame Mary before God. The Bible says we are going to be judged individually. Each one of us. And I want to leave this thought with us, please. If you're not a Christian this morning, if you're not a Christian, if you believe in Jesus, but you're not a Christian yet, just believing in Jesus is not going to make us a Christian. Then I want to encourage you, please, to be a Christian. Because only when you become a Christian will your name be written in his book. And he's going to look in his book. He's going to look and see, is John's name there? John Tabak, is he there? Oh yeah, there he's there. And if your name is not there, he say, lake of fire, man. But if your name is there, come with me and be in heaven. So if you're not a Christian this morning, I want to encourage you, please, to be a Christian. Any one of us can help you there to be a Christian. If you are a Christian, but there are things in our lives that we need to change, please let us change. I'm talking about myself too. We all need to change. Thank you very much. I hope this has been useful. In the weeks to come, we're going to talk about hell and we're going to talk about heaven. That's a different subject. But right now, we are stopping at the judgment. Thank you.